Have you ever really stopped to think about where money comes from? I mean, really comes from. It's probably one of the most important things in our economy, but you'd be surprised how many of us get the story wrong. So today, let's pull back the curtain on how banks actually create money. All right, let's imagine something. You walk into a bank, you get approved for say, a $200,000 loan to buy a house. A little while later, you check your account and boom, there it is, 200 grand. But here's the question. Where did that money really come from? You might think it came from a big vault, right? Or maybe it was transferred from someone else's savings account. Nope. The truth is, before the bank approved your loan, that money, it just didn't exist anywhere. So what's the big secret? The bank created it, just like that, out of thin air, with a few taps on a keyboard. And look, this isn't some crazy conspiracy theory. This is literally how our entire modern financial system is built. Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we first have to bust a myth that almost all of us believe. I call it the piggy bank myth. I know we all have this picture in our heads of how a bank works, right? People like you and me, we deposit our savings, and the bank just acts as a middleman, lending that same money out to borrowers. It's a simple, neat little story, and it's almost completely wrong. And here's where we see the difference, clear as day. The myth is that banks are passive, just shuffling money around. But the reality is that banks are active creators. When they give you a loan, they're not dipping into someone else's savings. They are creating brand new money. The technical name for this is credit creation. Now, it wasn't always like this. Way back in the day, goldsmiths would literally lend out the actual gold that people stored with them. But as our economies started to grow and boom, the demand for loans just went through the roof. That old model couldn't keep up. So the system had to change, and it evolved into what we have today. So if they're not lending out deposits, how does it actually work? Let's break down the mechanics of how money is literally made in the 21st century. Let's say you get approved for a $10,000 loan. The second that happens, the bank makes two entries on its balance sheet. First, your loan, which is your promise to pay it back, is listed as an asset for the bank. At the exact same time, the bank creates a new $10,000 deposit in your name, which is a liability for them. And then, poof, the money just appears in your account. That's literally it. And just like that, the total amount of money in the economy has just grown by 10,000 bucks. No wheelbarrows of cash removed, no gold was exchanged, brand new spending power was just created out of nothing. And hey, don't just take my word for it. This isn't some fringe idea. The Bank of England, one of the oldest and most respected central banks in the world, laid this all out in a paper back in 2014. They said it loud and clear. Most money is created by commercial banks when they make loans. Now, you're probably thinking what I'm thinking. If banks can just create money whenever they want, what's to stop them from printing it into oblivion and causing chaos? Well, there are some pretty important guardrails built into the system. For a long time, the textbook answer was something called fractional reserve banking. The basic idea was that a bank had to keep a certain fraction of its deposits, like, say, 10%, on hand in reserve. Then it could lend out the rest. This created what's called a money multiplier effect. But the modern system works a bit differently. The real constraints today are things like capital requirements, forcing banks to have a cushion of their own money to absorb losses. Central bank interest rates are also huge because they influence how expensive it is for banks to lend. And get this, in 2020, the US actually set its reserve requirements to 0%. Yeah, 0, which really shows you how much the system has shifted away from that old model. And this all leads us to something pretty weird and counterintuitive about the whole system. Let's call it the debt money paradox. So here's where things get really wild. Because money is created when a loan is made, it means that every single dollar out there is also someone else's debt. Think about that. Money and debt aren't just related, they're two sides of the very same coin. Let's try a quick thought experiment. What if tomorrow a miracle happened and everyone, every single person, every company, every government paid off every last cent of debt they owed? What would actually happen to all our money? The answer is pretty shocking. As those loans get paid back, the money that was created along with them gets destroyed. It vanishes. So if all of the debt in the world disappeared, nearly all the money would disappear right along with it. The entire global economy would just stop. And the craziest part? This isn't a bug. It's a feature. It's how the system is designed to work. So this all leads to a really fundamental question. Who's actually in control of this system? And who really benefits from it?
Well, if you look at how it's structured, there are some clear winners and losers. Borrowers can win out, especially when there's inflation, because the real value of their debt goes down. The banks obviously win by profiting from the interest on the money they create, but savers, they often lose because the constant creation of new money can erode the value of their savings over time. And for the system as a whole, it means a lot of that new money flows into whatever's profitable for banks to lend against, think real estate, not necessarily what's most productive for the economy.
Because of all this, the system is facing some serious challenges. There are big reform ideas out there, like full reserve banking, which would give the power to create money back to the government. You've got technologies like cryptocurrencies that are trying to create money totally outside of the banking system. And now, even governments are looking into their own digital currencies, which could completely shake up this whole dynamic.
So, when you boil it all down, what's the big takeaway here? Our economy isn't just a machine that uses money. It's a machine that creates it. And the fuel for that machine is nothing more than our collective confidence, our trust in the system, and our willingness to borrow and spend. And that leaves us with one final and really important question to think about. Now that you know how it all works, who do you think should have the power to create our money? Should it be private banks, the government, or maybe something else entirely? The answer to that question is going to shape our future.